Once again, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Kate Bigelow. I am the assistant director here at the Garden Montessori and Wild Hearts Nature School. I really look forward to doing these parent education sessions. We do host them about once a month, typically towards the end of the month, and we cover a variety of topics. So I'm really excited about this one. Today, we're going to be taking a closer look at Montessori schools, but specifically some of the differences between traditional education and Montessori education. So I typically enjoy using a slideshow for these. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. If you have any questions that come up throughout the presentation, feel free to write those in the chat box and I'll try to catch those, or we also will have an opportunity to ask any questions at the end of the session. So I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. Okay, so today we're talking about Montessori schools, traditional versus Montessori education. Let's talk a little bit about Montessori education. Now, this I will acknowledge is basically the Cliff Notes version of what Montessori and traditional education can look like. So some of the key features you will see in a Montessori classroom is that the activities and the materials and the lessons are all child-led. In that classroom, the environment is prepared ahead of time based on the needs and interests of the particular individual children in each classroom. In a Montessori classroom, we have a strong focus on building and guiding independent learning. We want our children to direct their own learning and become independent, well-rounded citizens. A huge aspect of the materials in a Montessori classroom are the idea that all of our materials are hands-on. The materials in a Montessori classroom are able to be manipulated, touched, felt. All of those learning experiences are done through a hands-on approach. And one of the buzzwords that you'll hear me say, and probably if you've been in any of my parent-child classes or in any of these previous parent education sessions, freedom within limits is a huge proponent, a huge aspect of the Montessori classroom. We allow our children to develop independence and participate in hands-on learning that is child-led, but that only works if that freedom is given within some sort of structure. Typically in a Montessori classroom, some of those limits are looking at child safety, material safety. A lot of the guidelines in a Montessori classroom are you being respectful to your peers? Are you being respectful of the materials? And are you being respectful of the teacher and the guide that's in place? Now, while some of those features will be seen in a traditional education classroom, there are some differences as far as in traditional education. For the most part, classroom experiences are teacher-led. They're based on the teacher's predetermined classroom model or ideally plan, and are not necessarily guided or led based on observations of the student and their current needs, interests, and developmental levels. A traditional education is what we call a top-down model, where in a traditional education classroom, the teacher is typically standing in front of the room, doing a great deal of direct instruction, speaking to the children without a lot of that back and forth. Along with that teacher-led and traditional education is what we would consider a one-size-fits-all approach. A Montessori classroom is more individualized to each child, where a traditional education classroom might be looking at meeting the needs of an entire group of children as compared to each individual child. I have a video that I play in all of my training sessions with teachers, with parents, and it's here by Trevor Eisler. Trevor Eisler was a Montessori parent. He actually isn't trained in Montessori. He wrote a text called the same title, Montessori Madness. It is available for you at the Garden in our lending library if you're interested in reading the text. But what I love about Montessori Madness is he wrote it in a way that is conversational for other parents. Sometimes Montessorians can use, as you've heard me do already today, a lot of buzzwords, a lot of things that are really specific to that Montessori environment. But Trevor Eisler does a great job of explaining Montessori education in a way that parents can really relate to. So I actually am going to play this fast draw because it really gives a great picture of what those differences can look like between Montessori and traditional education. I am going to send out a disclaimer before I play it letting you know that this video was designed for students once they have reached possibly the elementary level of school. So not necessarily designed for infants and toddlers or even primary children, but the information included can be valuable. So I'm going to go ahead and play that now. I'm going to go ahead and pause there. I apologize that the audio was not playing with that video. I appreciate your feedback. I will note that throughout this slideshow presentation, I have a variety of links. What I'll do is I will share those links, including the Trevor Eisler video, to the parent portal, and you can preview that there. I apologize if the audio is not working on that. I also have 2 additional links here that will allow you to read the differences between Montessori and traditional preschool, and then an article from US News about what a Montessori school is. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next slide. I apologize about the technology problems that I'm having today. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the historical perspective of Montessori education. Many of you have joined other parent education classes. You might have some prior knowledge of what Montessori education looks like, but I'm going to go into just, again, a kind of a Cliff Notes version of Maria Montessori and her background. Many of you might know that Maria Montessori was an Italian doctor and a scientist whose background came in anthropology. She actually was the first woman who was allowed to enter the medical school in Italy. So the work that she did actually stemmed not through her work in the hospital, but through her work with what back then they deemed as deviant children. So her very first experiences grew out of her work with children with learning differences and children with a variety of additional needs. Maria Montessori, through her observations, realized that children needed to nourish not only their bodies, but their minds as well. And in order to learn these things, she put a strong amount of value on observation. Again, if you've been in my parent-child class, I think my general refrain is observe, 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 observe. Basically, like a scientist conducting an experiment, through your observations, you can learn not only your child's interests, but what they're capable of, the ways that they're able to teach themselves, and the ways that they can really inspire independent thinking and concentration through a rich learning environment. Now, Dr. Montessori did believe that education should begin from the moment of birth, which is why more recently there's been a big push to bring Montessori education to infants and toddlers, which is a great deal of what we do during our parent-child classes. Montessori education involves everything we do with our children. Her work continued through World War II, where she spent some time in India working on her peace education curriculum and her cosmic education. I will note for the future, if you're interested in learning more about Maria Montessori's peace education, we will be doing a parent education class on peace education coming up this spring. So something to take away, Dr. Montessori called her work an education for life, not just for the classroom, but for our daily lives. So that's where those home and school connections are really valuable as well. All right, let's talk a little bit about just Montessori schools. Of course, that is, I might be a little bit biased, but there are a couple of particular pieces that you can look for when you are determining if a Montessori school is right for your child. Now, I will note that because Maria Montessori, in the time that she was alive, she never trademarked or put her name under a copyright. So there is not necessarily an overreaching body that can determine whether a school truly is a Montessori school or not. It can be sometimes difficult to discern the difference between what might be truly a Montessori school, a Montessori inspired program, or really just a childcare setting that's using the terminology that we're familiar with. So it's really important that you as a parent has the tools that they need to really look for if the school that you're looking at is really genuinely applying the principles and theories of Maria Montessori, or if it's just something where they're just using some terminology. So we're looking for a school that promotes hands-on learning and an understanding of the world with tangible materials. That gets back onto that hands-on learning, that children are given the opportunity to make discoveries for themselves through touching, feeling, exploring, and working with beautiful and solid materials. Now, those materials are typically in what I've mentioned as that prepared environment. A prepared environment includes everything from the materials to the tables and chairs, the size of the shelves, even up to the way we utilize the bathroom. So materials are always set out at child's level. The materials it's important that they are beautiful, that they're attractively presented, that no parts are missing. What we're doing in a Montessori classroom is we're asking children to guide their own learning, to teach themselves. Maria Montessori found many, many years ago that children are more likely to be drawn to materials that are aesthetically pleasing. Children are more drawn to be successful with materials that are fully complete. If there's a missing piece or a broken part, the child won't be able to complete that successfully without any intervention. In a Montessori environment, there are mixed age groups, whether that be in a toddler setting, where we're looking at those children from about 12 months to 2 years. A primary Montessori classroom is typically deemed a 3 to 6-year-old classroom. There's a lower elementary setting that would be children ages 6 to 9, and then an upper elementary setting that is children ages 9 to 12 years old. There is many things that can be gained from a mixed age classroom, but what I want to bring the most attention to is the way that the older children in a Montessori classroom can really model concepts and materials and lessons that they've mastered for the younger children. As those older children are modeling those lessons and sharing those lessons with the younger peers, they're reinforcing those concepts for themselves, reaching farther into mastery. Those younger children get the value of observing the older children. They get the chance to see what these activities and lessons look like in practice and really have a goal and an aspiration. So the mixed age classrooms bring a lot of value both for the older and younger children. In a Montessori classroom, the work time is going to be unstructured. We call it an uninterrupted work period. Now, we do accommodate those work periods through spending time in an outdoor environment, or even through additional variety of specials. Here at the Garden Montessori, we use yoga with Miss Kelly. So while we include a variety of additional classroom time in there, the goal is to work for it as long as an uninterrupted work period as we can. And the goal behind that is to build concentration. Children are more likely to reach mastery of a concept when they're given ample time to build and develop that concentration. In a Montessori classroom, the work time is unstructured. The students in our classrooms are free to choose whatever material they would like to work on and are able to work on it fully uninterrupted for ideally up to 3 hours. Children in a Montessori classroom, in my experience, are typically fairly happy and independent. They're given opportunities to guide their own learning, and the trust and connection that's established between a Montessori child and a Montessori teacher really allows them to grow into happy and independent young citizens. Typically in a Montessori classroom, there is little to no testing. Through a teacher's observations, they're able to understand which activities children have mastered or might need a little bit more practice on. But as far as a traditional assessment or testing phase, that's not typically seen in a Montessori classroom. For the most part, in order to be a true Montessori program, the teacher in the classroom has completed some type of recognized Montessori training program. And there are a variety of options for that, both here in the United States and internationally as well. In a Montessori classroom, the teacher is using a respectful tone of voice and truly an equal voice with children. In a Montessori classroom, like I said, there's not a lot of top-down teaching. In a Montessori classroom, the child and the teacher are on a level playing field of equal learning and opportunity. Natural learning is emphasized over traditional learning in a Montessori classroom. Again, like I just mentioned, rather than the teacher standing at the front of the class telling the children what they need to know, the children are free to explore and make those discoveries on their own in a more natural way. And finally, the school in a Montessori classroom will treat each child as a unique individual while looking at all aspects of their development rather than doing kind of a one-size-fits-all type of model. What does a typical day look like in a Montessori school? Now, I mentioned that prepared environment. Before the day starts, the teacher must prepare the classroom. That gets into those materials being at child's eye level. The materials that are being available are scaffolded onto each child's previous learning experiences, and they're based on prior knowledge. The materials in a Montessori classroom are going to be based off of those observations. Teachers are observing children and offering the next lesson when each child is ready. That'll be different for every child in class. Children can choose for themselves what they would like to do. I've mentioned it before in our parent and child class. It can seem a little bit free flowing. And at the beginning of an experience in a Montessori classroom, for some younger children, it can be a little bit overwhelming. Letting children know, hey, this is your space. You can do whatever you want, choose anything you want. It can be a little bit overwhelming for young children. So it's our responsibility as the adult in the Montessori space or as the teacher in the classroom to guide that learning with a little more structure. While it's their choice to choose for themselves what they'd like to do, sometimes children need us to provide a little bit more guidance and direction. Typically, there's less time spent on crowd control in a Montessori classroom because the teacher is focused on observing and doing that guiding that we just spoke about. Once again, we talk about mixed age classrooms, really allowing those older children to help the younger children. Those younger children are going to be learning naturally just by watching those older children. And then, of course, that freedom within limits. It's essential that children recognize that with this freedom, they have the choice to possibly avoid areas that might not be of great interest to them. It's our job as the adult in the room through our observations to determine if that child is ready, if we can offer them different activities that might be more accessible or more attractive, showing them a different way to follow their own interests. I see a question come through there. That's a great question. When looking at Montessori certifications, when it comes to teacher education, in the United States, the overreaching teacher certification body is the American Montessori Society, but there are a variety of teacher education programs that have provided a great deal of value. So we typically have seen, especially, and I will say, just speaking honestly, over the last 2 years with the pandemic, many quality programs have arisen that are based in more of a virtual type of setting. So to answer your question, I think that recognizing any type of Montessori certification or training is definitely valuable. And there aren't any that I would say I would steer away from. One clarification I will make, if you're looking and moving into other areas, I'm still new to North Carolina, but along with the American Montessori Society, there is also an organization deemed the American Montessori International. Now, while they are maintaining many of the same philosophies and principles, I will note that the American Montessori International does serve a variety of international populations. So that might look different than what you would see here in the United States. So I hope that answers your question. And I can absolutely provide some additional resources that will allow you to truly look at some of that more specific teacher training. So thank you for a great question. Okay, so moving forward, what are some of the benefits of a Montessori education? Now, again, I will say that I am biased. I have been a Montessori educator my entire adult life, almost 20 years. So while I am biased, I do believe that there are many benefits a child can receive through receiving a Montessori education. Children are learning in a rich learning environment that encourages that concentration and independence. Montessori schools are known for individually paced learning and for fostering independence. The Montessori method encourages empathy, a passion for social justice, and a joy of lifelong learning. That gets back into that piece I was mentioning before, where what the goal behind a Montessori education is to do is not only to grow a good student, but to really grow and develop a well-rounded citizen. In a Montessori classroom, our students are given the freedom and support to ask questions, to probe things more deeply, to really explore and concentrate for an extended period of time, and to make connections. Montessori students become confident, enthusiastic, self-directed learners. And had you been able to hear the sound in the Trevor Eisner video I shared, that's what the ending talks about, is what a Montessori education is really able to help children become and the benefits. So I would, again, apologize for my technological problems, but highly encourage you to preview that video once it's on the parent portal. Our goal moving into what a lot of educators, parents are looking for is we want our children to be able to think critically. We want them to be able to work collaboratively, and we want them to be able to act confidently and boldly. There's another article that shares a few more of these benefits that I will also place on the parent portal. How do these benefits happen? How can we track that our students are receiving these benefits? Through our individuality, through honoring each child as an individual, not looking at that top-down type of learning, but really honoring each child as an individual, recognizing that each child learns in a different way, and that we really try to accommodate all learning styles and each student at their own pace. The rule of thumb I say to my teachers is meet each child where they are. So beginning at a very early age, where we're looking at those terms I've said many times: order, concentration, independence, cooperation. Through our intentional classroom design, through our prepared environment, and through our daily routines, we're supporting those students in their ability to self-regulate, their ability to teach oneself, and to really critically think about what they're learning. And that is for toddlers all the way through adolescence. In a Montessori multi-age classroom, students are part of a close, caring community. It creates a family structure. For someone who's been doing this as long as I have, I've had students in my classroom for 3 years, and then their younger sibling comes in, and their younger sibling after that. And I've known some of these families that I've served for 10 to 15 years. And it really does provide that community type of feel. Those older students serve as mentors, the younger children feel supported, and then teachers are modeling that respect and that kindness throughout the day. Montessori students enjoy freedom within limits. While I've said that many times, it's something that young children respond to. Like I said, it can be overwhelming for young children to really, truly direct their own learning without some sort of guidance or parameter to be set. And it's really our responsibility as the adult in the community to make sure that in order for the students to be active participants in deciding what their learning will be, it's really our responsibility to structure that within a framework that allows every child to learn. Students in a Montessori classroom are provided an environment where they have the freedom to choose and pursue answers to their own question. In a Montessori classroom, we're looking a lot at intrinsic motivation. Now, I know that the sound wasn't playing on the video I shared, but one of the major differences between a traditional classroom and a Montessori classroom is that external versus internal motivation. We know that young children are driven by their own internal desire to want to learn. Maria Montessori found that out in the early 1900s, and we know that now. In a traditional public school, in a traditional setting, there might be more of a rewards-based system, sticker charts, offering a treasure box. I'm saying these things because of my familiarity with some of the typical things we might see in a traditional classroom. And really in a Montessori classroom, you're looking at that internal drive, that intrinsic motivation that children really do want to learn and don't need to be rewarded for doing something they naturally want to do anyway. Self-correction, a control of error, and self-assessment are an integral part of a Montessori classroom. As children are maturing and spending more time on their work and really concentrating and developing that independence, they really start to build that critical thinking and become more adept at recognizing and learning from their own errors. Montessori also supports social and emotional skills. Contemporary research has shown that the 100-year-old Montessori method's effectiveness, indicating that children who learn in a Montessori environment demonstrate stronger social and emotional skills than children in more traditional type settings. I wanted to take a closer look specifically at Montessori education for infants and toddlers, given that the video I played earlier was for our older children, and we do serve infants and toddlers here at the Garden Montessori and Wild Hearts Nature School. I wanted to note that when it comes to our youngest learners, Dr. Montessori observed that babies are conscious and capable of learning new things. Within your home, you can set up areas available for your children with beautiful spaces and exciting objects and activities for our youngest children to explore. We can observe when they need help, and we can allow them to make those discoveries for themselves. For our toddlers, as they grow a little bit older, we can continue to lay out materials at a child level. We can sequence them in order from easiest to hardest. We still can allow that toddler child to work at their own pace and follow their own interests. Your responsibility then as a parent, or mine as the teacher, is to observe that child. And when the student has seemed to have mastered the material, and I'll give a little bit more clarification, when we say mastery, the child is able to complete the material from start to finish without any adult assistance. So that's what I mean when I say has mastered a concept. They will give them a lesson, then on to the next material. Is Montessori education suitable for every child? I've been, again, in this field for many, many years. And I would say that this and the next question I'm about to is probably one of the most asked questions I get. We often wonder if Montessori is suitable for our children, or if it will only work for children who can plan well, who are already demonstrating a lot of independence, or maybe who can sit quietly and self-direct learning. What we have found is that Montessori does work for all learning types. It's my opinion that Montessori is suitable for all children. The materials we offer in a classroom give children opportunities to learn visually, kinesthetically, verbally, so they appeal to children who learn in different ways. Some children learn by observing. Some children learn by doing. Some children do not have to be busy all the time. They're welcome in our classroom to watch a child participate in an activity. Sometimes they'll learn so much through that observation that they might later on try that same activity for themselves. Another child might learn more from doing the activity repeatedly over and over again until they master it. So both types of children can thrive in a Montessori environment. Does our child have to be able to plan? Now, planning their day is something that older Montessori children will learn how to do over time. In younger age groups, children are following their natural rhythm and their interests. I've said in the parent-child classes, we're looking at schemas and sensitive periods. That's another one of those Montessori principles that can help guide not only our planning, but also our young children's experiences in the classroom or in the home. Some children might need more guidance than others, but a Montessori teacher or parent is able to guide the children who need more assistance and then pull back for those that don't need as much assistance organizing their work. What if our child needs to move around a lot? Montessori can be ideal for a child that needs to move around a lot. There is a physical, gross motor movement, fine motor, small movement component to each and every material in a Montessori classroom. We can see children moving back and forth a repeated amount of times to ingrain a particular concept. The pink tower is a great example of an activity that encourages visual discrimination, a lot of work in the sensory with the five senses, but also includes a movement component. Children are free to move around the classroom. They observe others when they would like. They're free to, serve their bodily needs at their own time, get a drink of water when they need, use the restroom when they need. A Montessori classroom can be a perfect fit for a child who needs to move. While it's my opinion that Montessori is a fit for all children, some, when looking at how Montessori might match your parenting style at home, it's important to keep in mind some of the limits that we put on the Montessori classroom, and other parents might find that those freedoms might be a little bit too permissive. So my experience has shown me that Montessori works best when children do experience a similar approach at home, where parents are respecting the child and allowing that freedom of exploration, but also setting those clear limits and ensuring that the child is staying within those limits. This question number 5, I'll go back to my experience. I was a Montessori kindergarten teacher for about 15 years. At the school that I worked at, our program ended at kindergarten. So our students had to transition into a traditional program upon the completion of their kindergarten year. And I will say that the number one question I've been asked over the last 15 years is, how does a child transition to a traditional school setting after being in Montessori? And I will say that my experience has shown me that children in a Montessori setting are building so many lifelong skills: a love of learning, independence, cooperation, collaboration. Those skills allow them to enter a new setting, whether that be a new classroom, a traditional school setting, and have all the tools that they need to be successful. What I like to say is that we all kind of have a different coat in our closet and we pull out at the right situation. Montessori learning in a younger age allows children to have all of the coats in their closet that they might need to approach any new situation. It's very natural to think, how will my child adjust to having to maybe sit in a desk and listen to teacher instructions, or maybe follow the teacher's timeline as compared to my own timeline? Children generally transition quite well. Their independence, their respectfulness, their sensitivity to other children, all of those skills allow them to be successful throughout the transition. And there's a lot that can be gained from talking to other Montessori families who might have made that transition. Even talking to the child who has done that. Sometimes talking to a Montessori child about how they felt about going to school, and if they had any challenges, we can get a lot of value from our alumni students who have already participated in those activities. So I'd like to talk briefly about the role of a Montessori teacher, or the role of the Montessori parent. So it's important that, again, we're getting back to that prepared environment. It's our responsibility to create and maintain an environment that serves the needs of each individual child. So when we're looking at that environment, it's important that we are being careful and thoughtful when we're maintaining that environment. It's important that we remove the obstacles from learning, encourage children to make sure that we're encouraging concentrated behavior, focusing. Again, that gets back to, we don't want to include any incomplete materials. We want to pay attention to tools that are the appropriate size for each child, and then making sure that in the environment our children are working in is physically comfortable. Things like it being, warm or enough light and things like that. Here we have on our third bullet point, that number one, that big buzzword, observe, observe, observe. It's important that we withdraw or refrain from any intervention unless necessary. Typically, those interventions have to happen when safety is at risk, when materials are being misused, or when there's some sort of conflict resolution that needs to happen between a peer. We use those observations also to learn about what our children like, what they're interested in, and where they are. And we use that information to make our decisions. Now it is our responsibility to be the link between our child and the Montessori environment. We understand the materials we've put out and why we did that based on our observations. We know our children's interests and our abilities, and we start there. We demonstrate those lessons through our observations, then we move on to what would come next. It's our responsibility to establish those ground rules, those limits. It includes consistent behavioral expectations. We can use the bells, but we can't hit the bells on the window, things like that. So that exploration within those limits. Again, intervening and redirecting when necessary. Make sure that you're taking time to observe the purpose behind any of those activities. Observe actions that are purposeful, redirect those that are not. And of course, as an adult around any young child, and that's just not in a Montessori classroom, we're a role model, not only with our behavior, through our movements, our speech, our attitude, our interactions. So it's really important that the first job as a Montessori parent or as a Montessori teacher is to become what we call the aware adult. In order to be successful in wanting to provide this for your child, it's really important that we're looking at ourselves, because our children and students are going to learn through imitation. So our goal is to guide our children to that purposeful, spontaneous activity that will guide them to that self-construction. In my opinion, Montessori really is a way of life. Like I had mentioned, it's really helpful when students and children are seeing the same principles both at home and at school. And in my opinion, it's not difficult to apply Montessori principles at home. There are ways that it can be done that are cost efficient and not completely intrusive. But it's important to keep in mind that it might look different from the way that you were parented in your childhood and the way others around us parent. So for that, I would say utilize the resources, reach out to Montessori people in your community, reach out to me, join things like the parent-child class that are offered through local Montessori schools and things like that. So that brings us to the end of my slideshow. I am going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And I am going to open it up to any possible questions. Again, some of the links that you saw throughout the slideshow will be available on the parent portal for you to look over on your own if you are interested. So feel free to speak your question or write it in the chat box. And that's okay if no questions come up right away. I have a knack to throw a lot of information really quickly. So feel free to mull it over. And if something comes up or you think of something that I wasn't able to cover or you have some additional questions, feel free to reach out to me anytime by email or by phone. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Again, I really enjoy doing these classes. And I'm going to add that name here, the American Montessori Society and American Montessori International.
Kate, there is a question in the chat too.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. What happens if a child moves from an activity to another but doesn't seem to master it? Okay. That is a really great question. With our youngest learners, now when we're talking about our toddlers, there is going to be a lot of kind of bounding around from one activity to another. That is because they're really is still in a phase of exploration. So my recommendation there would be is to make a determination based on the age of your child. To Christine, are you thinking about your child? Could you tell me the age of your child?
She is 15 months.
15 months. So when we're looking at mastery, that's typically going to come once they're reaching more of those what we call moving into that conscious absorbent mind. So more towards moving into some more older toddlerhood and things like that. A young child is going to need to take some time to build concentration, which will then result in mastery. So what my recommendation would be, if a child moves from one activity to another but doesn't seem to master it, is to continue allow that material to be available in your environment. Continue to guide your child back to that. So say it's maybe a 10-piece puzzle, and the puzzle comes off the shelf and the pieces come out, and then they maybe, they don't go back on, and the child moves on to another activity. At that, I probably, with a younger child, would not force stop and then redirect back to that original puzzle. What I would do is I would continue to offer that experience to the child over repeated days, over and over again. Oh, remember yesterday we were working with this animal puzzle. Let's try it again and see if we can get all the pieces back on. So that a lot of that reaching mastery, and sometimes, I even hesitate to use that term because really with our youngest children, we really are just wanting to provide as many opportunities as we can for exploration and looking at reaching mastery a little bit later on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Catherine. I'm scrolling through to make sure. Okay. Oh, I see one more message came through. Give me just a second. Okay, so we have a question here. Oh, okay, interesting. How do you deal with a child that doesn't want you to observe? For example, you might present the activity, they start it, but when you back away, they insist on that you continue your participation, a 2-year-old. That's a really great question as well. So that tells me that child is not ready to complete that activity independently. So there is, again, we're following each child where they are. My recommendation there is that you need, you can continue to participate. While we do encourage each child to begin to work on it on their own, we can absolutely continue to model those experiences as long as necessary. That might only take a few times. A lot of what we're looking at there is just that attachment. So I would continue to present the activity. If you move to back away, either physically or verbally, and then they're reaching out for you, they're looking for that back and forth communication, re-enter the situation. I would say to re-enter, to model again, pull back again, offer that opportunity. Would you like to try it on your own? If that child is still requesting that back and forth, continue to model that, especially for a 2-year-old, because that ability to work independently will come with continued and additional opportunities for practice. Right. These are some great questions. I have to say, these are some of the best questions I've got so far on one of the parent education classes. Does anyone have any additional questions? I moved off the slideshow pretty quickly, but my email again is just my name, Kate Bigelow at thegardenmontessori.org. If you'd like to reach out. I see a question here that maybe Catherine could answer for us.
I apologize. It must have been sent directly to you. I don't see one.
No, that's no problem. I have a parent interested in doing a trial parent-child class. Would that be a reaching out to Ellen?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So I believe that we would love to have you join a parent and child class. Feel free to reach out to our CEO, Ellen, and she can get you all set up for that.
Yep, she's Ellen at thegardenmontessori.org.
I will note, just so you can plan ahead with your schedule, if you're interested in doing a trial, those parent-child classes are offered on Mondays and Tuesdays from 2 to 3. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and jump off. I'm surprised I stayed within that time span. But again, if any questions come up or any additional information is necessary, please feel free to reach out, myself or Catherine. Again, I'll note that the lending library here at the Garden Montessori is a valuable resource for parents, and that is a way that you can check out a variety of texts through us, and there we have a variety of texts based on philosophy, on principles, but a lot of the texts can be helpful for at home learning. What is this going to look like for you at home? We have a variety of texts available for toilet awareness and specific needs that might arise. So absolutely keep that in mind as a resource as well. Okay. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time and your understanding of, you'd think after 2 years of doing things on Zoom, I'd have it figured out by now, but it's still a work in progress. The next parent education class will be coming up on Friday, February 25th at that same time, and it will have another fun new topic for us. So thank you so much for your time. Stay warm this weekend. It sounds like snow again. Welcome to North Carolina, Miss Kate, and we'll see you all very soon. Thanks so much.